Hey Acers, and welcome to this week's Ace Role-Playing Games podcast. I don't know what I call this thing, but whatever it is, it's our time of the week to get together, and I get to talk to you about Ace role-playing games, and of course, role-playing games in general, and things that kind of make me excited and things like that. Well, this week, as I've already mentioned earlier in a video, I got to see Dune on Tuesday, and I liked it so much I went back and saw it again on Friday with a buddy of mine. So I am definitely fresh off the Dune 2 boat, and I have survived it, and it makes me think, how can I explain my thoughts on adapting intellectual properties or IPs to a different medium than what they originally came in. Now, one of my favorite books of all time is Ender's Game. Okay, I would have to say that ranks in my top 3 of all-time favorite books. I've read it so many times. Probably going to read it again this year. But what I love about Ender's Game is the fact that it is such a sweeping epic, and it uses the idea, and my friend Sean McFate pointed this out, the idea of taking children when they're very young and beginning to teach them military and strategy. However, it does, as he points out, become kind of World War II again-ish. You know, there's a lot of military moving in formations and learning the games and everything like that. And so it's kind of there, it's kind of not. But what I love though is I get engrossed in that book every time I read it. And a number of years ago when I was working at the Department of Veteran Affairs, I listened to the audiobook as I was driving to and from work. And it was the 25th anniversary special edition that Scott had put together with a full cast reading of the book, which was almost as cool as in 2002 when I actually got to go to EnderCon and I got to meet Scott for the first time. And Scott, shout out to you. I love you, brother. You're one of my favorite people still in this whole world, even though we haven't chatted in a while, but I still love you. I got to meet Scott because he was friends with one of my friends, and she took me up and introduced me to Scott, and we did become friends. And it was really cool because they did a full day long reading of Ender's Game. They just had people up at a microphone reading the book and then handing it off to the next reader and reading the book. It was pretty cool. And I got to just, EnderCon was great, 2002. Well, that was, of course, like I said, the 25th anniversary of Ender's Game, if you count the original short story. Now, Scott did an interesting thing when he adapted Ender's Game, the short story, from 1977 into the novel in 1983. And that was, he had been trying to write Speaker for the Dead, which is the next book in the series, and he needed a character to be the speaker. And he thought, well, what about Ender? And so he jumped back to Ender in Ender's Game and brought the whole thing into the novel that we know and love. Well, Scott made a comment in an interview that's on that 25th anniversary recording of it, in which Harlan Ellison actually plays one of the roles on there. And that's really interesting because I've only heard that he was a grumpy kind of guy, but I don't know. I tend to end up getting along with grumpy guys. So, hey, whatever. But Scott mentions in the interview that here in America, we view the movie as the highest form of entertainment. And Hollywood's trends as of late only proves that is true. However, Scott viewed the audiobook that we had just listened to as the highest form of the art for that book, because it had the full cast, but it was the full reading. It was all of his words on the page. And so that's my first point. As a game master, remember that you're not an author. If you want to write a story, go grab a typewriter or one of those nifty cool typewriter-like thingies that can store all of it in its own local memory and doesn't reconnect to the Wi-Fi until you get back home. Go up to a cabin in the woods, get a stock of whatever your favorite candy is, and just write your novel. If you want the story to go exactly the way you want it to go, write your novel. However, if you want to help group storytell the story, and you want to see where other people would go with a scenario that you come up with, that's where we game master. So if you want to recreate Ender's Game, or as we move into movies, because frankly I was kind of disappointed with the Ender's Game movie. It had some great acting in it. It had some great moments in it. I did love the transparent domes, or the transparent sphere of Battle Room. The battle room being a transparent sphere was really cool. Although if you read the book, there are multiple battle rooms that connect to the same point. But still, regardless, there were some certain points of that that were really great. And the graphic novel definitely influenced some of the look and feel of that. Having the gun right here instead of on the hip. That's probably a pretty good idea. It makes sense to me to just be able to pull your arm up here and have your gun. Boom, boom. But the thing is that I just didn't work. And I love Harrison Ford, but Harrison Ford did not do a good graph. And Dap needed to be the person that they had him cast as. And but there's other things that I could go into on that, because I'm also going to talk about Dune. Dune is another one of those novels that I've read multiple times, and I've read and reread it and listened to the audiobook and listened to the audiobook again. I have interacted with the physical and the audio medium of it multiple times. I've read all the Dune books, cover to cover, at different points in my life. I've gone through them all. I've gone through them audiobook multiple times. And Dune is great. There are some things that I don't like in the books. There are some things that no, doesn't work for me. And I think sometimes Herbert gets a little heavy-handed on some of the stuff that he's trying to tell but not tell. However, on the whole, the original 6 Frank Herbert novels still classify for me as some of the greatest science fiction ever made. And I had seen Arrival when Denis Villeneuve, however you spell his last name, I can't spell it very well, and I know he's French-Canadian, and I don't speak French yet, but I'm hoping I pronounce his name correctly. Denis Villeneuve, when he did Arrival, I was like, that is good science fiction. And I found out it was later found out it was based on a short story. And I was very impressed with that story. I still haven't read it yet, but I was impressed with the story as presented in the film Arrival with Amy Adams and Forrest Whitaker and Jeremy Renner. And it does something wonderful, something that I think science fiction does better than almost any other genre. And that is, it leaves you with a question in your heart after seeing it. And that question for me when I watched Arrival was, how do I, or would I still go into something that's going to fail, even if I knew it was going to fail? Like, she still marries Jeremy Renner's character, even though she knows their marriage is going to fall apart. She still has that daughter. And sorry for the spoilers on a film that's many years old now, but does her communication make it so she can better face what's coming to her, the triumphs and tragedies? So that's where Arrival kind of sits for me. And then when I saw Blade Runner 2049, also Villeneuve, I started to realize that Denis Villeneuve is possibly one of the greatest science fiction directors of our time. And I really like his science fiction. I like the way he tells science fiction. I like the fact that he doesn't have to cover it up with dialogue all the time. And he got criticized for that with this new Dune movie. And he did, there's a scene in there that's pivotal to the movie. When I first saw it, my daughter looks over me and is like, "Dad, are you crying?" I'm like, "No, but this is just so amazing." And I won't actually talk about it right now because it's one of those scenes that I never thought it would actually be done. Because when Kyle MacLachlan does the same thing in the old Dune movie, well, I mean, if you've seen the old Dune movie, you've basically seen the story. I'm going to spoil a little bit, but there is the worm riding scene. And when Paul in the new Dune Part 2 rides the worm the first time, it is so visceral, so real. It's like being on the worm with him. And he's even pulling open the rings of the worm, as in the book. So I guess there's not much that I can spoil if you've read the book. So I will go ahead and put a spoiler warning hashtag in this, because if you haven't read the book, it might spoil some stuff for you, but if you have, you'll understand what I'm saying. I did not like the fact that the film ends with Paul and Chani at odds. That it seems like Chani, and the whole Chani being anti-prophecy through the whole thing. I didn't like that. I liked the way Herbert told it originally. However, I did like the bringing back in of Margot Fenring, and one of the coolest sci-fi things I've ever seen is in that movie with the Black Sun on Gedi Prime, where the whole world is bleached to an ultraviolet black and white, and skin is white and clothes are black. It was just so cool. And the fireworks in that black and white world. Villeneuve even thought about that, and how you would just kind of splat this oil stuff across the sky. Looks like oil getting splattered on the water. It was really cool. I liked that the machinations and the plotting of the Bene Gesserit was a lot more included. I liked that Florence Pugh's Irulan was a lot more included. She wasn't just a voice at the beginning of the film and a pretty woman at the end of the film. She was actually involved, and you see that she's also a Bene Gesserit. And see, that's the thing, is that Chani was supposed to start becoming a Reverend Mother of the Fremen as part of the book, and she hates Jessica at the end. She hates Paul, and I'm just like, ah. And I didn't like the fact that Stilgar and the jihadis all immediately ran and jumped on the Emperor's ships and took off for the stars to go fight all the houses of the Landsrot. No, it's implied in the book that this takes years for Paul's forces to conquer the universe, and I am looking forward. I'm grateful that Villeneuve has decided to wait for a few years for Chalamet to mature a little bit more before he does Dune Messiah, and I'm glad that he's going to do it. It'll be cool to see Jason Momoa again as Duncan Idaho coming back in with his Gola silver eyes, and it'll be interesting to see if they do continue down that run with Anna Taylor-Joy as Alia, and if they do, it's going to be interesting to see her and Duncan getting together. That'll be an interesting take. So those are my thoughts and feelings about the movie. Now, how does this apply to game mastering? I would say that this applies in the same way that we experience as a game master, because there are tons of cool intellectual properties out there. Star Wars, of course, that's one that always gets named and used in role-playing games. And Lord of the Rings, of course. Dune, Ender's Game, I mean, even Arrival. There's just a ton of really cool intellectual properties out there. But remember, you're not retelling the book. You're not retelling the story. When we ruminate and we think about those worlds, we're not necessarily thinking about the plot itself as laid out by the author. We're thinking about, well, what would be a cool story to tell there? Because that's what we're doing as a role-playing game group. We are telling a story. And there are certain ways that you would adapt. I mean, incidentally, on the Dune front, I will put my stake down in the sand and say this. There are certain characters that cannot and probably should not be adapted to a role-playing game setting, where rules limit how things go. Because Paul is above and beyond the rules. However, I've got over here in my stacks and piles the Dune Adventures in the Imperium game from Modifus. And that RPG looks really cool. I ran a test version of it one year when it first came out. A couple years ago, right after the Dune movie came out, I ran the Dune Adventures in the Imperium game. And you can play characters that are Mentats and Bene Gesserit and other things like that aren't... And you can even interact with like a tribe of Fremen and stuff, but they're not part of the main storyline. And so that's one of the good suggestions that I've gotten for doing an IP. Don't have whatever you're doing be either part of the main storyline, affect the main storyline, or have any fallout from the main storyline. So if you're going to run Harry Potter, a friend of mine, Tracy Sizemore, she runs at conventions an unofficial Harry Potter adaptation where and she even like has you roll to have your wand selected. You get measured and you roll your dice to see if the wand accepts you. And she's got a stack of wooden wands and stuff like that, and it's part of the game. It's part of the fun, and it is immersive in the feeling of Harry Potter. It's even playable online. And the thing is, though, is that she has it take place 7 years before Harry Potter even gets there. So the effects of what happened in her story do not affect Harry's actual story. And it was a blast. It was one of the most fun role-playing games I've ever played. And I shout out to her. I also think that with Star Wars, like I've said before on this channel, when I run it, I want to run it with the same elements in place so that I get the same feel. There's still the Republic. There's still the Jedi. There's still, now, like I said, I've removed Palpatine from the Senate and put him into a role as a liaison between the Senate and the Jedi, so he has more strings to pull. And yes, Palpatine still wants to take over the galaxy and turn it into the Empire. But it's not going to be done with the promise that the Skywalkers are going to destroy it. The Skywalkers are not even in my version of Star Wars. Now, Lord of the Rings is a little bit harder for me, in my opinion. Because you've got that one main story, and it hinges on the destruction of that ring. Going back to Dune, and there are other intellectual properties that I would have a hard time adapting into a role-playing game. Like I said, in Dune, you couldn't do Paul. You might be able to push for a Jessica-type character, but you could never actually do anything as cool as Paul. So, why bother trying? Why bother letting your players try? Let them do their own cool thing. Let them, if they're going to become the Kwisatz Haderach, let them become it on their own. And it doesn't affect Paul or his Kwisatz Haderachdom. Rune Lords by David Farland. Great IP. I love it. It's one of my favorites. Yes, albeit I'm a little biased because, well, he was my uncle, but still. Rune Lords has powers off the charts. It basically, he explained it to me one time. He said, because I was at one point actually trying to write a role-playing game for it. And that was that a man with a rune of strength has twice as much strength as a normal human being man. But he also needs a rune of metabolism so that he can move fast enough to be able to use that greater strength. He needs a rune of dexterity to be able to, to basically be able to relax his muscles and he needs a rune of stamina to be able to not have his bones break when his magically enhanced strength arms flex. Because the thing is that Raja 10, the villain of the first few books of the Rune Lords, he has thousands of runes. How do you calculate in a role-playing game 1,000 times stronger than a human being? 1,000 times stronger or doubled over? No, it's too much. There's too many mental mathematics. And there are too many other good settings out there that you can try that will give you a similar feel to what you're after. If you want to play something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, play East Texas University. It has a feel very much just like it, but there's no Slayer. And you get to make your own story happen. And there's these other events going on in the background, because as game masters, that's what we do. We put the events in motion in the background and let the players figure out how to solve it. And that's where the story comes in. We don't create the story. We create here's what the bad guys are doing. Now, you guys as players, solve it. So those are my thoughts, ruminations, everything like that about what I do when I adapt an IP. And I hope that there are IPs out there that you want to adapt. I hope that there are ones that have been adapted. I hope there are ones that haven't been adapted that you want to help adapt to, whether a private one or find out that later on that somebody's interested in doing it. Like my friend Manny, he adapted Shadowrun to Savage Worlds. Then it got so close and so good that he was informed, please take it down. We don't want your version of it. So he filed off the serial numbers, which is a great Savage Worlds thing to do, and he put out Sprawl Runners. And Sprawl Runners is one of the best sellers of all of Savage Worlds outside of Pinnacle. And the thing is that you can flick the switch whether it's got magic or not magic. There are adaptations of things to Dungeons and Dragons. A buddy of mine, Brandon, and his group at Starforge Anvil, they just put out an adaptation of Secret World for 5e, which is amazing and wonderful. Put it out. I mean, admittedly, I think Savage Worlds handles guns better than 5e, but maybe there are some other rules out there that I haven't read that would allow for the adaptation of guns. I mean, from what I understand, Vox Machina involves a gun as part of the whole thing, and they pull it off basically with 5e rules. Whatever you choose, whatever role-playing game system you like, choose it and figure out how to get the feel of what you're after in that game. So, other than that, I just want to remind you that I do love you. And it's true, I love you so much. You're amazing. The world's a better place because you're in it, and I love that you come and visit with me every week. And I look forward to seeing you at my table. So until next time, this is Mason Emerson for Ace Role Playing Games.